The Recovery Kernel. Substance-Specific Navigation Series. How to recover from DXM. Using the Recovery Kernel Framework. DXM, dextromethorphan, robot ripping, C, Skittles, DM, gel caps, Delsym. Warning: harm reduction resource, not medical advice. Crisis, call 911 or text 988. DXM plus SSRI or MAOI equals potentially fatal serotonin syndrome. Check your medications. Combination products, Dayquil, NyQuil, C, contain acetaminophen or antihistamines that cause liver failure or cardiac toxicity at misuse doses. CYP2D6 poor metabolizers experience DXM completely differently, and face dramatically higher serotonin syndrome risk. A note before you begin. The Recovery Kernel Compendium addresses DXM through three separate framings that, taken together, explain both why this substance is dangerous and why it is systematically ignored by clinical systems. First, the OTC safety illusion: over-the-counter doesn't mean safe for everyone. The compendium documents this in the context of CYP2D6 pharmacogenomics, where drugs metabolized by this enzyme produce radically different effects in poor metabolizers versus normal metabolizers. DXM is the most dramatic example in common OTC use. A CYP2D6 poor metabolizer taking DXM at recommended cough suppressant doses can produce serotonin syndrome. At misuse doses, the pharmacological experience is entirely different from what a normal metabolizer experiences from the same product. Second, the acetaminophen glutathione depletion warning. The compendium explicitly names acetaminophen as one of the primary depletes of glutathione, the liver's master antioxidant. Many DXM-containing products also contain acetaminophen. At misuse doses, the acetaminophen load becomes directly hepatotoxic. The person seeking DXM's dissociative effects from NyQuil or Dayquil is simultaneously delivering their liver a potentially lethal dose of a hepatotoxin. Third, the dissociative and NMDA context. DXM's primary dissociative mechanism operates through NMDA receptor antagonism, the same system that makes ketamine therapeutically interesting and recreationally compelling. The compendium's ketamine framework, the default mode network suppression, the ego dissolution architecture, and the integration challenge all apply here, but through an OTC product that costs $8 at any pharmacy, requires no prescription, and is completely invisible to the healthcare system as a substance of misuse. DXM misuse is the most clinically invisible significant substance problem in this guide series. The people who use it are often teenagers and young adults buying cough syrup at 2 a.m. The substance is dismissed as juvenile and unworthy of serious clinical attention. The people using it are often the most isolated, most depressed, and most disconnected from any recovery support structure. This guide takes them seriously. Read Section 0 before anything else. The product-specific toxicity hazards of DXM combinations are immediate safety information. Section 0, Immediate Safety, the product hazards. Warning: the most dangerous thing about DXM is not DXM itself, it is what else is in the bottle. 0.1, Product toxicity: what else is in the bottle? Classical building the centurion, the safety illusion of OTC status, the compendium's warning applied directly. DXM is rarely sold alone. Most consumer cough and cold products containing DXM also contain one or more additional active ingredients that become toxic at the doses required for DXM's dissociative effects. The following table is the most important safety information in this guide. It determines whether what the person is using is primarily dangerous from DXM or from something else entirely. Warning: Coricidin cough and cold, C, is the most dangerous commonly misused DXM product. The chlorpheniramine content is the primary kill mechanism, not the DXM. Never use C for its DXM content. 0.2, Serotonin syndrome, the critical drug interaction. Warning: DXM inhibits serotonin reuptake. Combined with any serotonergic medication, this can produce fatal serotonin syndrome. This is the most common serious medical complication of DXM misuse and is entirely preventable. DXM is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It blocks SERT, the same transporter that SSRIs block. Combined with any medication that also increases serotonin activity, this creates dangerous serotonin excess. SSRIs, Prozac/fluoxetine, Zoloft/sertraline, Lexapro/escitalopram, Celexa/citalopram, Paxil/paroxetine all block SERT, combined with DXM equals serotonin syndrome risk. Paroxetine specifically is also a potent CYP2D6 inhibitor, which means it also blocks DXM's conversion to dextromethorphan, further increasing DXM plasma levels and the serotonergic risk. SNRIs, Effexor/venlafaxine, Cymbalta/duloxetine serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibition, combined with DXM equals elevated serotonin syndrome risk. MAOIs, phenelzyme, tranylcypromine, selegiline, high-dose St. John's wort, ayahuasca/harmaline block serotonin breakdown, combined with DXM equals severe, potentially fatal serotonin syndrome. This combination has killed people. Tramadol, opioid with serotonin reuptake inhibition, combined with DXM equals elevated serotonin syndrome risk. Linezolid, antibiotic with MAOI properties less common but documented interaction. Serotonin syndrome recognition, agitation, confusion, rapid heart rate, high blood pressure, dilated pupils, muscle twitching or rigidity, especially legs, diarrhea, hyperthermia, diaphoresis. This is a medical emergency. Call 911. CYP2D6 and the serotonin syndrome amplifier. CYP2D6 poor metabolizers are at dramatically elevated serotonin syndrome risk because they cannot adequately convert DXM to dextromethorphan. DXM itself accumulates to high levels, with its SERT inhibiting properties dominating. If you know you are a CYP2D6 poor metabolizer, DXM plus any serotonergic medication is a contraindication of extreme severity. 0.3 High-dose emergency recognition. Section 1. What DXM did to your brain. Classical building the centurion, the cough suppressant that is also a dissociative, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, a sigma receptor agonist, and a weak opioid. DXM is pharmacologically unusual. It acts on 4 distinct receptor systems simultaneously, and the relative contribution of each system depends on the dose, the specific product used, and, more than any other substance in this guide series, the individual CYP2D6 genotype. Understanding this multi-system architecture explains both the unusual range of DXM's effects across the 4 plateaus and why the recovery must address multiple systems simultaneously. 1.1 The 4 receptor systems. 1.2 The CYP2D6 split, 2 different substances in the same bottle. Classical building the centurion, the most genetically variable OTC substance in clinical pharmacology. The compendium CYP2D6 documentation states plainly, if you've ever felt that pain medications either didn't work or worked far more intensely than they should, CYP2D6 testing matters. For DXM, this statement is more literal than for any other substance in the guide series. CYP2D6 doesn't just affect the intensity of DXM, it determines which pharmacological entity is primarily experienced. 1.3 The 4 plateaus, the dose effect architecture. Classical building the centurion, the framework that the DXM community built from experience. The plateau framework for DXM effects was not developed by pharmaceutical researchers but by the online DXM harm reduction community, primarily through the work of William White's DXM FAQ and subsequent community documentation. It remains the most practical dosing framework for understanding DXM's effect profile. The compendium's approach to precision language applies. Knowing which plateau the person was using determines which systems are most implicated in recovery. 1.4 What DXM was providing, the compendium's diagnostic question. Classical building the centurion, the noise went away. Understanding what noise is the recovery target. DXM's multi-receptor profile means it was providing different things to different users at different doses. The recovery architecture depends on which function was primary. 1.5. The Internet community and the knowledge it produced. Classical building the Centurion, the most thoroughly documented harm reduction community for any OTC substance. DXM misuse has one of the richest online harm reduction communities of any substance, the DXM FAQ by William White, written in the 1990s and still referenced, Opioids DXM Vault, the DXM community at Reddit and various forums. This community developed the plateau framework, documented the serotonin syndrome risk decades before most clinicians acknowledged it, and produced genuine safety information that clinical medicine has largely ignored because DXM was not considered a serious drug problem. This guide honors that knowledge base while extending it with the recovery kernel framework's biological and genomic precision. The harm reduction community knew about CYP2D6 before most physicians did. The recovery framework adds, what happens after you stop, how to support the systems DXM damaged, and how to build the access to the states DXM was providing through means that don't come with a co-ingredient hepatotoxin. Section 2, Your Genomic Blueprint. DXM has the most genetically variable pharmacological profile of any substance in this guide series. CYP2D6 is the defining variable. It determines which compound primarily reaches the brain and therefore which receptor systems dominate the experience. Recovery strategy depends entirely on knowing which phenotype applies. The DNA testing panel for DXM recovery. Phenotyping without testing. Did DXM produce dramatically stronger effects than peers reported at the same product dose? Possible CYP2D6 poor metabolizer, DXM accumulating without adequate conversion. Or, CYP2D6 inhibiting medication, SSRI, converting you to effectively a poor metabolizer. Did DXM produce primarily emotional warmth and mood elevation rather than dissociation? Sigma, 1 and SERT components dominant over NMDA, suggests CYP2D6 poor metabolizer profile, DXM itself more than dextromethorphan. Did you ever experience a serotonin syndrome-like reaction with DXM? CYP2D6 poor metabolizer plus SLC6A4 short plus likely concurrent serotonergic medication. Did DXM at lower doses, first plateau, seem to help you focus or quiet ADHD-like symptoms? DRD4-7 repeat plus DAT1-10 repeat ADHD profile. ADHD evaluation is a recovery priority. Did you develop persistent visual disturbances or HPPD-like phenomena after heavy DXM use? HTR2A high expression variant. Section 4.4 addresses HPPD management from heavy DXM use. Section 3, the recovery framework, what DXM recovery actually requires. Classical building the Centurion, like ketamine, like LSD, but available at every pharmacy. The invisibility problem. DXM does not produce the seizure risk physical withdrawal of alcohol and benzodiazepines. It does not produce the medical emergency of opioid withdrawal. What it produces is closer to the ketamine and LSD recovery territory, NMDA rebound, serotonin system disruption, HPPD risk, integration backlog for high plateau experiences, and psychological dependence on the dissociative or altered states. The specific challenge of DXM recovery that no other guide in this series faces, the substance is OTC, costs almost nothing, and can be purchased at any pharmacy without age verification in most states. Environmental redesign, removing the supply, requires genuinely different strategies than removing an illicit drug supply. The access barrier is essentially zero, which means recovery must be substantially internal rather than primarily environmental. 3.1 What makes DXM recovery different? 3.2 The withdrawal and aftermath timeline. Section 4 Biological reconstruction. DXM recovery requires concurrent reconstruction of three systems: the NMDA glutamate system, like ketamine recovery, the serotonin system, like MDMA recovery but milder, and the liver if acetaminophen co-exposure has occurred, urgent if significant. The methylation foundation underlies all three. 4.1 The methylation foundation. 4.2 urgent, liver support for acetaminophen co-exposure. Warning: if you have been using DXM products that also contain acetaminophen, NyQuil, DayQuil, combination syrups, NAC is an urgent priority, not optional supplementation. Acetaminophen toxicity is silent for 24 to 72 hours and then becomes irreversible. The compendium specifically names acetaminophen as one of the primary deplete of glutathione. NAC, N-acetylcysteine, provides the cysteine required to synthesize glutathione, the liver's primary defense against acetaminophen hepatotoxicity. NAC 600 to 1,200 mg orally immediately if significant acetaminophen-containing DXM product use occurred in the past 24 hours. This is the same mechanism as the hospital 4 NAC used in acetaminophen overdose. Oral supplementation works for lower-level exposure. If high-dose acetaminophen exposure, more than 4 g in 24 hours at therapeutic doses, lower in liver-vulnerable populations, go to an emergency department. For NAC is more effective than oral at high exposure levels. Do not wait for symptoms. Liver function testing, AST, ALT, bilirubin. If any significant acetaminophen co-exposure history, liver enzymes should be checked to establish the current hepatic status. Ongoing liver support, milk thistle, silymarin 200 to 400 mg daily, alpha-lipoic acid, 300 mg daily, NAC, 600 mg morning and evening, for 4 to 8 weeks after cessation if acetaminophen exposure was significant. 4.3, NMDA system normalization. From the Ketamine Guide, applied to DXM recovery. NAC, 600 to 1,800 mg daily, divided, with food restores glutamate homeostasis in the nucleus accumbens. The glutamate rebound of NMDA antagonist withdrawal responds to NAC's cysteine glutamate antiporter modulation. Begin immediately. Magnesium glycinate, 400 to 600 mg elemental, morning and evening natural NMDA channel blockade providing gentle modulation of the rebound glutamate surge. L-theanine, 200 to 400 mg, as needed partial NMDA modulation at the glycine site, reduces the cognitive hyperactivity and anxiety of the NMDA rebound period. Glycine, 3,5-G, evening NMDA coagonist supporting receptor normalization during sleep. Counterintuitively, supporting some NMDA activity helps the receptor system normalize after chronic antagonism. Omega-3 DHA, 2G plus daily neuronal membrane support for NMDA receptor environment, anti-neuroinflammatory. 4.4, Serotonin reconstruction. Warning: start 5-HTP only after 3 to 5 days of DXM cessation. Earlier addition risks serotonin syndrome from residual SERT inhibition by DXM combined with added serotonin precursor. The Ketamine Guide's caution applies here. 5-HTP, 50 to 100 mg, evening, after day 3 to 5 serotonin precursor for the SERT inhibition dimension of DXM's disruption. Do not combine with any SSRI, SNRI, or MAOI. L-tryptophan, 500 to 1000 mg, evening, away from protein alternative to 5-HTP, upstream serotonin precursor, gentler onset. Use one or the other. Inositol, 4,8-G, divided serotonin receptor sensitivity modulation, anti-anxiety, relevant to the social anxiety that often underlies DXM use. EPA-dominant omega-3, 2,4-G daily anti-inflammatory and mood support for the serotonin recovery dimension. 4.5, HPPD management from heavy DXM use. Heavy or long-term DXM use at third and fourth plateau doses can produce HPPD-like visual phenomena, the same category of perceptual disturbances documented with ketamine and psychedelic use. The compendium names HPPD in the context of hallucinogen use. DXM's NMDA and sigma-1 mechanisms place it in this category for HPPD risk. Complete cessation of DXM, NMDA and sigma-1 receptors cannot recover density and sensitivity under continued stimulation. This is the prerequisite. Cannabis cessation, the same HPPD exacerbation documented with psychedelic-associated HPPD applies to DXM-associated visual phenomena. Cannabis is the most reliably reported worsening factor. The HPPD management protocol from Section 4 of the LSD Guide applies: the antioxidant neuroprotective stack, EGCG, alpha-lipoic acid, NAC, vitamin C, DHA, sleep optimization, anxiety management, and avoidance of SSRI monotherapy, which may worsen visual phenomena. If visual phenomena are persistent and impairing at 4+ weeks after cessation with cannabis also ceased, neurological and psychiatric evaluation. Clonazepam, short-term, and lamotrigine have evidence for HPPD management. 4.6 Underlying condition treatment. Classical building the Centurion, DXM was a solution. Recovery requires finding the actual problem. The Compendium C37, Substance Masking Analysis, is directly applicable here. Every substance preference is a signal, and every signal points to something that needs repair. For DXM use disorder, the signal most commonly points to depression, often the primary driver, particularly in adolescent and young adult populations. 5-MTHF evaluation. First, MTHFR variant depression is extremely common and responds to 5-MTHF without requiring SSRI prescription. If clinical depression persists at 6 weeks post-cessation with full supplement protocol, psychiatric evaluation. SSRIs are appropriate but require full cessation of DXM, never combine. ADHD. Undiagnosed ADHD is significantly overrepresented in DXM use disorder. ADHD evaluation should occur early in recovery. Non-stimulant treatment, atomoxetine, guanfacine, viloxazine, is appropriate for people with stimulant use concerns alongside DXM. Stimulant ADHD treatment requires careful risk-benefit assessment with addiction medicine involvement. Social anxiety disorder, DXM sigma-1 and serotonergic effects provide social ease and anxiety dissolution that is specifically compelling for people with severe social anxiety. Buspirone, non-addictive, CBT, and SSRI-based treatment, after complete DXM cessation, address the underlying condition. Trauma and PTSD, DXM's dissociative effects provide trauma buffering, the same mechanism as ketamine's therapeutic dissociation from traumatic memory. EMDR, CPT, or other trauma-specific treatments alongside the recovery framework. 4.7 Sleep reconstruction. Magnesium glycinate, 400 mg elemental, evening NMDA modulation and GABA support. Glycin, 3,5-G, 30 minutes before bed core body temperature reduction and NMDA receptor support. L-theanine, 200 mg, evening alpha wave promotion and NMDA modulation. Melatonin, 0.5 to 1 mg sublingual, consistent time circadian signal for disrupted sleep architecture. 5-HTP, 50 mg, evening, after day 3 to 5 serotonin-melatonin conversion supporting sleep. The Compendium Psychedelic/Dissociative Sonic Protocol for Sleep, Ambient, Drone, Theta binaural beats, 4 to 8 Hz, very low volume, no sudden dynamics. The DXM-specific note, avoid music from the using context, the auditory memory is potent and can trigger craving. 4.8 Peptide support. Section 5, the DXM craving, understanding and interrupting. Classical building the Centurion, the craving that can be executed in 10 minutes at any pharmacy, the architecture of the OTC problem. DXM cravings have a specific structure produced by the OTC accessibility. The decision to use to having the substance pipeline is radically shorter than any other substance in this guide series. An opioid craving requires finding a supply. A stimulant craving requires a dealer or diversion source. A DXM craving requires being near a pharmacy and having $8. The craving interrupt must work in the 10-minute window between trigger and pharmacy entry. DXM craving trigger map. The DXM craving interrupt, 5-minute protocol, within the 10-minute window. Pause the route. If walking toward a pharmacy or store, stop physically. Pause. Do not continue walking toward the supply. The 10-minute rule, the decision to purchase must not happen for 10 minutes after the craving fires. This is the window the protocol operates in. Execute 4-7-8 breathing, 5 cycles. The OTC craving fires fast because the supply is near. The vagal brake is the fastest available countersignal. 5 cycles while standing still or redirecting. Take NAC and magnesium, or note them for next dose. The NMDA and glutamate substrate of the craving is addressed by these supplements. The craving has a biochemical component, address it biochemically. Name the underlying state. Depression. Anxiety. Boredom/isolation. ADHD. The specific underlying state is the signal the craving is carrying. Naming it activates the specific intervention rather than the generic craving response. Change your physical route or environment. If the trigger was pharmacy proximity, take a different route. Do not enter the building. Physical environment change is the most direct intervention for the OTC proximity trigger. Contact. Text or call your support structure. Name what triggered it. The OTC craving in isolation is particularly dangerous because the entire use cycle, trigger, purchase, use, can happen alone and invisibly. Contact breaks the isolation. Execute your natural dissociative/mood access. From Section 6, NSDR, meditation, vigorous exercise, music absorption. The craving is for a state, provide an alternative path to an adjacent state. Section 6, porting the addiction, building natural access to the states DXM provided. Classical building the Centurion paper C28 applied to DXM, the silence that was available all along. DXM's multi-receptor profile provided different things for different users. The recovery architecture's natural porting matches the specific function. For the dissociative escape seeker, the Ketamine guides natural porting framework, meditation for DMN suppression, NSDR/yoga nidra for hypnagogic dissociation adjacent states, holotropic breathwork for non-chemical altered states. For the emotional analgesic seeker, the MDMA guides natural porting framework, genuine human connection for oxytocin and serotonin activation, exercise for endorphin and serotonin co-release, community. For the consciousness explorer, the LSD guides contemplative tradition framework, any systematic path with a map of non-ordinary states and a community for navigating them. For the ADHD symptom manager, ADHD treatment, non-stimulant medication, behavioral strategies, structured environment, the compendium's dopamine architecture. Finding the activity that produces genuine, sustainable focus, music, martial arts, coding, any craft at the challenge skill edge. The natural architecture for the states DXM provided. The adolescent-specific recovery architecture. Classical building the Centurion, the person who found DXM at 15 is different from the person who found heroin at 30. DXM is heavily an adolescent and young adult substance. The recovery architecture for this age group has specific features that standard adult addiction recovery frameworks do not address. Identity formation. Adolescent recovery occurs alongside the fundamental developmental task of identity formation. The person is not recovering a pre-substance identity, they may not have had one fully formed before DXM entered the picture. Recovery is partly identity construction for the first time. Family system. For adolescents and young adults living with family, the family system is part of the recovery environment. Family members who understand DXM's pharmacology, and who understand that it is not just cough syrup, can provide meaningful support. Family therapy is often appropriate. School and academic context. The cognitive fog of DXM recovery, particularly if ADHD is unmanaged, directly affects academic performance. Academic accommodation, ADHD support services, and teacher/counselor collaboration are recovery tools. Peer environment. The peer relationships that formed around DXM use require the same renegotiation as any substance use social environment. Finding peers who don't use, through sport, arts, academic teams, hobby communities, is the primary social recovery intervention for adolescents. Developmental acceleration. Some adolescent DXM users have used the substance's dissociative and consciousness-altering properties to navigate developmental experiences, sexuality, identity, family stress, existential questions, that they did not have adult frameworks to manage. Recovery includes building these frameworks, through therapy, contemplative practice, and genuine community. Section 7, Navigating the Recovery Kernel, Your Protocol Map. Section 8, The Medical Context, The Invisible Problem. DXM misuse is systematically underserved by clinical medicine for a specific reason. It is not illegal, not perceived as serious, and is associated with adolescents who are often not the primary clients of addiction treatment systems. There is no MAT for DXM. There are no DXM-specific clinical guidelines. Most physicians have minimal training in DXM misuse beyond the pediatric poison control context. What this means for people seeking help: you may need to advocate for the seriousness of your experience. The compendium's Protocol 13, the physician conversation, applies directly. 8.1 Medical Priorities in DXM Recovery. Liver function, AST, ALT, bilirubin, and GGT for any acetaminophen co-exposure history. Baseline and 3-month follow-up. Mild elevation is common, significant elevation requires hepatology referral. CYP2D6 testing, the most actionable single pharmacogenomic test for DXM history. Also informs future medication safety for any CYP2D6 metabolized prescription drugs. ADHD evaluation, formal psychiatric evaluation if ADHD is suspected. This is both a recovery support and a patient safety intervention. Untreated ADHD drives relapse across multiple substances. Depression and anxiety, PHQ-9 and GAD-7 screening tools provide initial assessment. Referral to psychiatrist or psychologist for formal diagnosis and treatment planning. HPPD evaluation, if persistent visual phenomena are present at 4+ weeks post-cessation, neurological evaluation to rule out other causes. HPPD experienced psychiatrist or neurologist is the appropriate referral. Cardiac evaluation, if decongestant-containing products were used at misuse doses, ECG and blood pressure assessment. 8.2 Having the physician conversation. When seeking clinical help for DXM recovery, the framing matters. I've been drinking a lot of cough syrup typically produces dismissal. The following clinical language is more likely to generate appropriate response. I have been misusing dextromethorphan, DXM, at doses producing dissociative effects, in the range of X mg per session, frequency. I am experiencing specific symptoms, NMDA rebound anxiety/serotonin system disruption/persistent visual phenomena/mood disorder. I am concerned about hepatotoxicity from acetaminophen co-exposure and want liver function testing. I would like CYP2D6 testing to understand my pharmacogenomic risk. And I believe I have comorbid ADHD/depression/anxiety that was driving the use and needs its own treatment. That paragraph transforms the clinical encounter from dismissal to treatment planning. 8.3 Purchasing restrictions and harm reduction resources. DXM purchase restriction. Many states require age verification, 18+, for DXM purchases. Some chain pharmacies have implemented voluntary purchase tracking programs. CVS Pharmacy limits DXM purchases and requires ID. These restrictions are harm reduction measures. For people in recovery, they can provide an additional environmental barrier. DXM-specific harm reduction, Opioids DXM Vault, arrowid.org/chemicals/DXM, remains the most comprehensive harm reduction information available. The DXM FAQ by William White is foundational. SAMHSA's treatment locator, findtreatment.gov. While DXM is rarely listed as a primary substance use disorder treatment for comorbid depression, ADHD, and anxiety is appropriately addressed through the standard treatment locator. Teen Line, 1-800-852-8336, for adolescents specifically, peer support by teens trained in crisis response. Crisis text line, text home to 741741. A final word. Classical building the centurion, the cough suppressant that told you the truth about what you needed. DXM was never supposed to do what it did for you. Bayer invented it to suppress coughs. It ended up in the hands of teenagers who discovered that it quieted something much louder than a cough, the noise of ordinary consciousness, the weight of untreated depression or ADHD, the unbearable social self-consciousness of anxiety, the existential questions that adolescence asks without providing any frameworks for answering them. The Compendium C-37 principle is exactly applicable. Every substance preference is a signal. The DXM preference was one of the clearest signals in this series because the signal was so specific. The NMDA blockade that quieted the mind, the sigma-1 agonism that lifted the mood, the serotonergic warmth that dissolved the social anxiety, these were not random recreational effects. They were pharmacologically precise solutions to neurobiological problems that the healthcare system had either not identified or had not adequately treated. The OTC status that made DXM so accessible made those problems invisible too. Nobody takes an $8 cough syrup habit seriously. Nobody asks a teenager buying Robitussin what's going on at home, at school, in their head. The substance solved the problem invisibly and the problem remained invisible. Recovery names the problem. The depression, real, biological, often MTHFR variant impaired synthesis that 5-MTHF will address where SSRIs couldn't. The ADHD, the attention system running on the wrong frequency, for which appropriate treatment produces the focus DXM was supplying through receptor antagonism. The social anxiety, the nervous system that finds social exposure genuinely dangerous, for which CBT and practiced exposure build the tolerance that sigma-1 agonism was pharmaceutically providing. The existential questions, which belong in the contemplative traditions that have been holding them for millennia and that DXM was providing a shortcut to at the cost of NMDA rebound and hepatotoxicity. The cough syrup told you the truth, your nervous system needed something. The recovery is finding out what that something actually is, and building the conditions in which your own biology can provide it. The noise went away when you used DXM. Recovery is learning that the noise was always manageable. The nervous system was built to manage it. You just needed the right tools and someone to take seriously what the cough syrup was actually saying. DXM harm reduction, arrowid.org/chemicals/DXM teen line, 1-800-852-8336 crisis text, home to 741741. Refer to the Recovery Kernel Complete Centurion Compendium for all referenced protocols. Crisis, call or text 988 Emergency, 911 SAMHSA, 1-800-662-4357. Warning: harm reduction resource, not medical advice. How to recover from DXM using the Recovery Kernel Substance Specific Navigation Series.